you know Kevin Spacey?
Yes.
Also an Academy Award winner.
Yeah.
He does what I think.
The spotlight once crowned Al Pacino as a king. Piercing eyes, commanding silence, the face of power in Hollywood. But behind the applause was a man raised in poverty, haunted by abandonment and nearly consumed by his own fame. Alcohol, cocaine, isolation, endless nights alone in empty hotel rooms, and more shocking than anything else, the man who terrified the world on screen was most afraid of being forgotten. Rare photos, unseen moments, and the untold truth behind the legend of Al Pacino will be revealed in this video. Al Pacino was born on April 25th, 1940, in East Harlem, New York City, to Italian-American parents who were barely out of their teens. His father left the family when Al was still a toddler. Soon after, his mother took him back to the South Bronx, moving into a cramped apartment with her own parents. That absence, quiet, unresolved, permanent, became the first invisible scar of his life. The Bronx of the 1940s and 1950s was not romantic. It was loud, crowded, and unforgiving. Violence was common. Poverty was visible everywhere. Young Al grew up watching men assert power through fear and reputation, long before he ever stepped on stage. These streets would later echo in his performances, not as imitation, but as memory. Pacino was a shy, observant child. Teachers noticed his intelligence, but also his restlessness. School never felt like a place of belonging. By his early teens, he had already begun skipping classes, wandering the city, sitting in movie theaters for hours, memorizing gestures, voices, and silences. Films became his refuge. They offered structure where his real life had none. At 17, he dropped out of high school. For his family, it was a quiet disappointment layered on top of existing hardship. He worked odd jobs to survive: messenger, janitor, delivery boy, often barely earning enough to eat. There were nights he slept on friends' couches, and moments when homelessness was uncomfortably close. The image of the future Hollywood icon had not yet taken shape. At this point, Al Pacino was simply trying not to disappear. What he did have was obsession. Acting was no longer a dream. It was a necessity. He enrolled at the HB studio in Greenwich Village, later earning a place at the legendary Actors Studio. There, under the influence of method acting, Pacino learned to mind his own pain. His loneliness, his anger, his fear, all of it became fuel. Every emotional wound from childhood was repurposed into craft. Yet even in these formative years, rejection was constant. Directors told him he was too short, too intense, too strange. He was fired from early stage roles. Friends moved on to more stable lives. Pacino stayed, stubbornly committed, often choosing art over comfort, discipline over security. Poverty followed him like a shadow, but so did resilience. His relationship with his mother remained close but strained. She worried about his future, about his instability, about whether this obsession would lead anywhere. Pacino rarely spoke publicly about his father. The absence was never explained, only absorbed. That silence would later define many of his characters. Men shaped not by what they were given, but by what was missing. Long before fame, before awards, before power, Al Pacino learned how it felt to be overlooked, to be underestimated, to be alone in a crowded city. These early years did not just prepare him for acting. They shaped the emotional DNA of every role he would later embody. And soon, all of that buried intensity would collide with a single opportunity, one that would pull him out of obscurity and thrust him into the unforgiving light of global fame. Al Pacino's entrance into the acting world was not marked by applause or instant recognition. It was marked by rejection, slow, repetitive, and often humiliating. After studying at the HB studio and later being accepted into the prestigious Actors Studio, he believed talent and discipline would be enough. They were not. Casting directors dismissed him as unmarketable, too short, too intense, too unconventional. In an industry that favored polished looks and safe performances, Pacino felt like an anomaly. He landed small theater roles, often unpaid or barely noticed, performing for tiny audiences who had no idea they were watching a future icon. Applause, when it came, was faint. Money, when it came, disappeared immediately. There were moments when survival outweighed ambition. Pacino worked whatever jobs he could find to stay afloat, moving furniture, delivering packages, cleaning spaces he would never be invited to perform in. Some nights, he slept on friends' floors. Other nights, he wandered the city until morning, unsure where he would end up. Fame was not a promise. It was a distant rumor. Even in theater, where his intensity was better suited, stability never arrived. He was fired from productions for being difficult or too much. Directors admired his commitment, but feared his unpredictability. Each dismissal reinforced a quiet fear that his dedication might never translate into a career. Yet something kept him going. Pacino treated every role, no matter how small, as if it were the last chance he would ever get. He studied relentlessly. He observed people in the streets, memorized their rhythms, their pauses, their violence, their vulnerability. He wasn't building characters. He was building himself. The 1960s passed slowly. While other actors found early television success, Pacino remained on the margins, respected by a small circle, ignored by the industry at large. Recognition came in fragments, a strong stage performance here, a critical nod there, but never enough to change his circumstances. Doubt crept in, not about acting, but about whether the world would ever make room for someone like him. Then, in the late 1960s, a shift began. A few directors started to notice what others had overlooked: his rawness, his authenticity, his refusal to perform safely. Small film roles followed, still modest, still uncertain, but different. For the first time, the camera didn't reject him. It leaned in. Pacino stood on the edge of obscurity and opportunity, unaware that one role, one decision made by skeptical producers, was about to pull him out of anonymity and place him at the center of cinematic history. Everything changed in 1972. When The Godfather was released, Al Pacino was still a risk. Studio executives had argued against him until the very end. They wanted established stars. They wanted safer faces. Pacino was nearly fired during production, constantly monitored, constantly doubted. What emerged on screen, however, silenced every objection. Michael Corleone was not loud. He was not theatrical. He was controlled, restrained, and terrifying in his stillness. In a film filled with powerful performances, Pacino's quiet transformation became the center of gravity. Almost overnight, the unknown stage actor from Bronx became a global figure. Fame arrived suddenly and violently. Interviews, magazine covers, premieres, expectations. Hollywood didn't just embrace him, it reshaped him. The media built a new image: the intense, dangerous genius, the man who understood darkness, the face of authority and menace. Pacino did not correct this image. He absorbed it. Success followed success. Serpico, 1973, cemented him as a symbol of moral obsession. The Godfather Part 2, 1974, elevated his status to legend. Dog Day Afternoon, 1975, revealed his emotional range. Awards followed. Nominations multiplied. His name alone could open films. Yet the more the public admired him, the more distant he became from himself. Pacino disliked interviews. He avoided personal questions. He rarely spoke about his private life. The public saw power. They did not see anxiety. They saw control. They did not see exhaustion. By the late 1970s, his image was fixed. He was no longer just an actor. He was a presence. Directors sought his intensity. Audiences expected volatility. Every role carried weight, and every performance was measured against its own legend. There was no room for quiet failure anymore. Behind the scenes, pressure mounted. Pacino felt trapped by expectations he never asked for. The fear of becoming repetitive, of losing relevance, of being exposed as replaceable, crept into his work. Fame had solved his financial struggles, but it introduced a new instability, one rooted in identity rather than survival. The man who once feared invisibility now faced a different threat, being consumed by the image Hollywood created for him. And as the spotlight burned brighter, shadows began to form just outside the frame. As Al Pacino's status grew, so did the weight he carried behind closed doors. By the late 1970s and into the 1980s, the line between his on-screen intensity and his private life began to blur. Fame had given him access to everything: money, influence, excess, but it had not given him peace. Alcohol became a constant companion. Cocaine followed soon after. In Hollywood at the time, substance abuse was not an anomaly. It was almost a ritual. For Pacino, it began as a way to cope with pressure, with exhaustion, with the constant demand to be extraordinary. Slowly, it became a crutch. Nights blurred together. Parties stretched until morning. Performances were still powerful, but the cost was mounting. Unlike many of his peers, Pacino never embraced a traditional family life. He avoided marriage, avoided permanence. Relationships came and went, intense, complicated, often strained by his emotional distance and erratic lifestyle. He had children with different partners, yet remained largely private, almost guarded, about fatherhood. To the outside world, this reinforced his mystique. To those close to him, it revealed something else: a man deeply afraid of attachment. By the early 1980s, cracks began to show professionally. Films like Cruising, 1980, sparked controversy and backlash. Scarface, 1983, would later become iconic, but at the time it divided critics and intensified Pacino's reputation as volatile and extreme. Some praised his fearlessness. Others accused him of self-indulgence. The industry that once doubted him now questioned whether he had gone too far. Behind the camera, Pacino was increasingly isolated. He distrusted executives. He clashed with directors. He withdrew from social circles. Hotel rooms became his refuge, quiet spaces where the noise of fame could be muted, at least temporarily. Rare photographs from this period show him alone, sunglasses shielding tired eyes, shoulders slouched, body language heavy. The image of power was beginning to erode. The most dangerous element was not the criticism, it was the internal collapse. Pacino later admitted that there were periods when he barely recognized himself. The discipline that once defined him had loosened. His fear of irrelevance pushed him to excess rather than restraint. The same hunger that once fueled his rise now threatened to undo him. By the mid-1980s, Hollywood had started to move on. New faces emerged. New styles replaced the raw intensity that had once made Pacino indispensable. Offers slowed. The silence he feared as a young man returned. This time louder, more ominous. For the first time since The Godfather, Al Pacino was no longer certain of his place in the world he had conquered. As the late 1980s approached, Al Pacino's decline became harder to ignore. The phone rang less often. Scripts felt repetitive or uninspired. When offers did come, they lacked urgency, a quiet signal that Hollywood no longer saw him as essential. For a man whose identity had fused with his work, this silence cut deeply. Pacino withdrew almost completely. He turned down projects, disappeared from the public eye, and retreated into theater, not as a strategic move, but as survival. On stage, there were no box office numbers, no marketing machines, no headlines. Just craft, just truth. It was the only place where he still felt real. Substance abuse intensified during this period. Friends later described him as exhausted, emotionally brittle, drifting between discipline and collapse. Cocaine and alcohol no longer enhanced performance. They dulled it. The fire that once made him magnetic now burned erratically. There were moments when his career felt not paused, but finished. What made this phase particularly painful was the contrast. Scarface slowly gained cult status, quoted endlessly, revered by a new generation. Yet Pacino himself felt detached from its success. The public celebrated a character frozen in time, while the man behind it struggled to stay grounded in the present. In rare interviews, Pacino later acknowledged that fear drove many of his worst decisions. Fear of fading, fear of mediocrity, fear of becoming irrelevant. Fame had not erased the insecurity of his youth. It had amplified it. The same boy from the Bronx who once feared disappearing now watched his relevance slip away, despite everything he had achieved. The turning point came quietly, without spectacle. There was no public scandal, no dramatic intervention, just exhaustion. Pacino began to confront the reality that excess was no longer sustainable, that intensity without control was destruction, not artistry. He stepped back, he reassessed, he chose restraint, not out of enlightenment, but necessity. This period marked the end of illusion, the illusion that talent alone could carry him, the illusion that fame equaled fulfillment. For the first time, Pacino faced a question he could not perform his way around. Who was he without the constant validation of the spotlight? The answer would not come immediately, but it would arrive through a role that demanded vulnerability rather than menace, restraint rather than power, a role that would redefine how the world saw him and how he saw himself. By the early 1990s, Al Pacino stood at a crossroads few legends ever publicly admit to reaching. His name still carried weight, but the certainty was gone. He was respected, yet no longer feared, celebrated, yet no longer essential. For an actor whose life had been defined by intensity, this limbo was more terrifying than failure. Then came Son of a Woman, 1992. The role of Lieutenant Colonel Frank Slade was unlike anything Pacino had played before. Blind, aging, bitter, and painfully aware of his own decline, Slade was not a symbol of power. He was a man confronting the end of his usefulness. Pacino did not dominate the role. He inhabited it. Every gesture was measured. Every outburst carried weight. The performance felt less like acting and more like confession. When Pacino won the Academy Award for Best Actor, it was widely framed as overdue recognition, a lifetime achievement disguised as a single win. But for Pacino, the Oscar meant something more complicated. It was not triumph. It was survival, proof that he could evolve without self-destruction. That restraint could be as powerful as rage. The rebirth that followed was quieter than his rise. Pacino became selective. He chose roles that challenged him without consuming him. Films like Carlito's Way, 1993, Heat, 1995, and The Insider, 1999, showcased a more controlled, reflective performer. The intensity remained, but it was tempered by experience. Off-screen, he pulled further away from excess. Substance abuse receded. Theater returned to its rightful place, not as escape, but as grounding. He accepted the rhythms of aging, the reality that no career remains permanent at the peak. For the first time, Pacino seemed less concerned with domination and more interested in honesty. This phase did not erase the past. It reframed it. The pain, the fear, the obsession, all of it became part of a larger arc rather than a destructive loop. Pacino had not conquered his demons. He had learned how to live alongside them. And with that acceptance came something he had chased his entire life, often in the wrong places, a fragile, hard-earned sense of balance. As Al Pacino moved deeper into the later stages of his career, the urgency that once defined him slowly gave way to reflection. He no longer chased dominance. He no longer needed to prove his intensity. Time itself had become his collaborator. Pacino continued to work steadily, but selectively. He moved between film, television, and theater with the confidence of someone who understood his limits and accepted them. Performances in projects like Angels in America, The Irishman, and numerous stage productions demonstrated an actor less interested in spectacle and more drawn to nuance. Silence, once his weapon, became his signature. Publicly, Pacino remained enigmatic. He avoided social media, rarely spoke about his personal life, and resisted the modern machinery of celebrity. While the industry transformed around him, he stayed rooted in craft. For younger actors, he became a benchmark, not just for talent, but for longevity in a profession that devours its own. His personal life remained unconventional. He never married. He maintained relationships on his own terms. Fatherhood arrived in stages. Later in life, shaped by absence as much as presence. Critics speculated. Audiences projected narratives. Pacino allowed none of it to define him. Privacy, once impossible, became a choice. The legacy you leave behind is not one perfection. It is one of contradiction. He embodied power while fearing irrelevance. He mastered control while battling excess. He became a legend without ever feeling secure inside the role. And perhaps that tension is precisely what made his performances endure. Al Pacino changed how masculinity was portrayed on screen. He redefined intensity. He proved that vulnerability could be dangerous, and that restraint could be devastating. His influence extends far beyond awards or box office numbers. It lives in the language of modern acting itself. And as the curtain gradually lowers, what remains is not just a body of work, but a human story, flawed, restless, and unmistakably real. Al Pacino was never built for comfort, from the streets of Bronx to the highest stages of Hollywood. His life unfolded not as a victory march, but as a long negotiation of fear. Fear of poverty, fear of invisibility, fear of becoming irrelevant once the applause faded. He reached heights most actors only imagined, yet rarely felt secure standing there. Power on screen did not translate into peace often. The roles that made him immortal were born from the same wounds that nearly broke him. Fame did not heal his past. It magnified it. And still, Pacino endured, not because he conquered his demons, but because he learned to listen to them, to slow down, to accept limitation, to understand that legacy is not built by domination, but by honesty over time. His journey is not a lesson in success, but a study in survival. In the end, Al Pacino is remembered not as a perfect icon, but as a man who exposed the cost of greatness and paid it in full. The screen may dim, the roles may fade, but the truth behind the legend remains. Brilliance is rarely quiet and it is never free.